All right, we'll start sooner. This is one of the only events that starts on time, is ahead of schedule, almost full seating the whole time. Congratulations, organizers. Thanks so much for having us. So we'll start. I'll give a very unnecessary introduction to hype everyone up for this panel. So we all know that ZK is the future of all blockchains, as we very well know from Vitalik's posts, EF's posts, all of our work. And Ethproofs has become kind of our de facto collective to make sure that those efforts, especially around cost and latency, are very transparent and progress us towards that directions. Our panelists today are team members from teams that have committed to this vision and the effort to build shared infrastructure in the public. Today, we'll discuss our collective progress in the last months, the walls that we're inevitably hitting, and then what's next. I'm Reka. I'm Director of Marketing of RISC Zero, the first project to bring RISC-V-based general purpose zkVMs to the blockchain space. Currently focusing on launching the Boundless Protocol, a universal infrastructure to bring that ZK to every chain. And I'll be asking our panelists to introduce yourselves. And I have a fun icebreaker question for us with a short answer, which is, when did you become full-time ZK? And let's start with Porter.
Hi, I'm the big ZK intern at ZKsync. I went full-time in ZK after I was a security auditor and my company had no work for me. And so I just studied ZK for a month and I made a YouTube class and it kind of went viral. And then here I am.
Hey, my name's Yi. I'm one of the co-founders of Axiom. We're building OpenVM, which is a modular zkVM focusing on support for different ISAs. I think I started working full-time in ZK roughly summer of 2022. I was at this Xerox Park residency where we built a lot of random stuff, for example, pairings in CirCom, and just explored what was possible.
Hi, my name is Radi. I'm co-founder and CEO of Irreducible. I started approximately a few months earlier than Yi, but we come from similar background of quantitative high-frequency trading, and I joined this ecosystem on premise to bring the infrastructure from traditional markets into Ethereum ecosystem and to help scale zero-knowledge proving. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Leo, one of the founders of Powdr. I think I started full-time on ZK maybe 2.5-ish years ago. I used to work on formal verification, and it was too complicated. I got bored and started learning ZK. Was more fun in a way, but now I'm doing both at the same time, so it's fun.
Thanks, everyone. For more context and declarations about this panel, we'll try to keep it very practical since the title also indicates this. I want to give space to our panelists to go deep and explain their point of view. I'm not trying to spark arguments. This is not one of those panels, but well, you know, if you take it there, it's fine. We'll go with the flow, but it's going to be very, very practical. I can guarantee you guys that. If not, I will be yelling or redirecting us. So our first topic is, I really want to, on the line of what we've done before and so far up until this time with Ethproofs, I want to start with some victory laps because you guys all deserve it. And the question really is during this time of roughly having contributed to Ethproofs, what is a breakthrough or a milestone that you're happy to share that your team has done that is meaningful to this? And in what way did it impact proving EVM blocks? And maybe let's start on that end.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just for full disclosure here, we are a team that bets on both type of ISAs in the place. One is RISC-V ISA that we collaborate with RISC Zero, and the other one is Powdr VM, which is a custom ZK ISA approach to proving Ethereum blocks. And with that, we collaborate with Powdr, Leo sitting here. So we are really just open-minded about all the approaches which can lead to faster proving. And one of the bets that Irreducible really took is to try to blend cryptography research with hardware software co-design to try to optimize the entire stack. This prevailed from Powdr VM design into our BNews proving system that relies upon efficiency. And we've been trying to accelerate proving for RISC-V based systems and custom ISA over the course of time. And yeah, this is for us still a work in progress. We haven't achieved real-time proving, and we are working on it.
Can you summarize this in one sentence for the audience to remember?
Yeah, we are working on several VM approaches to try to achieve real-time proving.
Thank you. Leah?
Wait, so question is the one unique thing?
It's like a milestone or breakthrough
Right.
in the duration of time having contributed to Ethproofs. And then how does this impact proving Ethereum blocks?
I think, so recently we've been focusing a lot on compiler optimizations, and the one word that I've been repeating at all times is just auto precompiles. And the idea is
Good
that
word.
it's, yeah, I've heard. And it is basically that you can do optimizations on top of any guest program, on top of any zkVM, and this is completely orthogonal to the proof system, to the proving backend, and this basically is just more optimizations on top of everything else. And this comes from an area that's a bit under-optimized in zkVMs because a lot of teams come from cryptography, and that's where a lot of the optimizations, a lot of the efforts go into. So there's still a lot of room for improvements on like the higher level ISA compiler and VM sides. Yeah, and the outcome of this is that basically you get faster proof generation time, not only for Ethereum verification, but of course, it's also applied there.
Thank you. Oh, let's do this.
Yeah, so I had mentioned that OpenVM is a modular zkVM framework. And what that means is that developers can put together sets of opcodes to construct their desired ISA. That's enabled by a new type of zkVM design we came up with called a no CPU architecture. As the name suggests, the key distinction here is to remove the CPU chip that exists in most zkVMs and just allow all components in the VM to sort of coexist together. That has two benefits. First is that in the short term, there's some performance benefit as well as easier modularity. Second, and perhaps this is a longer term thing that would relate to some of the compiler work, is the possibility of creating program-specific optimizations and chips that are adapted to each guest program. The end goal of both of these is to achieve better performance. So in the short term, we just went into production on Scroll mainnet, and you can kind of see both the cost and latency reductions there.
I'll say ZKsync is happy just to be proving EVM blocks at all. For a long time, we had EraVM as our virtual machine, which was not quite the same as EVM. And so we're happy our new proof system, ZKsync Airbender, is bringing like full EVM compatibility. And then it's also hitting like all of the performance benchmarks that we were hoping for, including proofs every 1 second of our mini blocks. We have, I don't know off the top of my head, metrics for like a full Ethereum block, so I won't say it now, but we're getting close to the buzzword of real-time proving.
I'm hoarding both right now. So what I'm hearing as a summary is so far, everyone individually is getting faster and more collaborative and open, just as a summary. So you guys are on the same page so far as us. Moving into the walls that we're hitting and that bridging us towards what can be done in the future and what we should be focusing on the next 12 months. So Ethproofs heavily focuses on cost and latency. I want to ask all of you what use cases of applications that are usually much more complex in their requirements. What are those use cases that the current zkVM performance does not equal to? And what other kind of requirements does it require us to work heavier on other than cost and latency? So summarizing my question is the experience itself that requires different performance, and then what are those performance metrics? And let's start with you guys.
Sorry, I'm struggling with the question a little bit.
So, okay, I'll summarize it again. I know it was a long like following question. Okay, so the question is, currently we are very focused on cost and latency with Ethproofs, but there's other mainstream or real applications that we can think about that currently with the RISC and performance that we have and what we focus on don't really satisfy. And what are those experiences, and what other metrics aside from cost and latency are the ones that are hindering us to satisfy these?
I think security is probably a big one. We're pretty worried about security in general. That's why there's so many like backup situations. So we have TEs as a backup. We also have like consensus algorithm as a backup, and hopefully 2 or 3 of those won't break at the same time. Yeah, that's probably my biggest concern besides just speed and cost.
No. You stay. I want you also, thank you, to give a concrete example of an experience, maybe based on the security concerns.
Well, we're thinking about decentralized prover concretely. Hopefully that's concrete enough. And so we want like anybody to be able to run our prover, which like when I first heard about this, I was like, isn't it like stupid simple? You just like open source the code and you give everyone the like instructions and they like press run and anybody can run the prover. But the actual reason why we hold back from that is because if there are bugs in your code, a malicious prover then has sort of like free reign to go submit like a malicious proof. And so, yeah, that's kind of what we're worried about, but what we want to have happen.
Yeah, I would say a general class of applications we're interested in at Axiom is slightly more institutional applications where traditional fintechs are entering, not fully crypto, but areas adjacent to crypto. And I think those companies generally actually have a higher level of security focus. And I think it comes in a couple dimensions. One is definitely just the number of bits of security that are even being targeted, to what extent the security is conjectural versus proven, but also in terms of what are the artifacts that a developer using a system or user seeing a system has to verify to believe that the system is actually secure. I think today the security surface area of almost every zkVM is quite large. And I do think it's hard to quantify this, but I feel it's important to try to reduce that surface area so that users can really believe that a proof is valid and that large amounts of funds can be moved on that basis.
I have a follow-up question for you as well. So would you highlight security as the next metric aside from cost and latency that we should really focus on? Or is there something else?
Yeah, I would say security, but maybe not. I think a metric is a weird way to think about security. I think it needs to be fundamentally a bit more holistic.
How do we, in the context of Ethproofs, so let's say this is what we'll talk about at the end of the panel as our next 12 months focus. What do you think are some aspects that we can focus on within security to make sure that we're all on the same page progressing towards the similar standards?
I do think there are certain areas which can be standardized. For example, the number of bits of security. I think there are areas that are much harder to standardize. I think, for example, how systems use precompiles, how patching is done in the full tool chain. I think a lot of that is actually much more on the clarity of documentation of a system rather than a security property per se. So yeah, maybe one possibility is to ask teams just to even submit what they consider the best documentation.
Same question to this side, gentlemen. I'll repeat the question again because we heard a lot of things since. Is specific experience that the current zkVM performance is running into walls with, and then what other metrics or requirements we should focus on in order to hit those other than cost and latency?
I'll try to provide the answer in the reverse order. So I think the first thing that I would like to see more, and this is, I think, why Ethproofs are great, we finally have at least one proper benchmark for VMs. And we struggle so much to like compare different VMs against each other. Well, at least now we are all proving Ethereum blocks, and we have one good kind of category to compare things against each other. I think, there's been a lot of benchmarking crimes in the industry in the past, and this at least kind of opens the new playground for all of us to compete. So I think that's great. One thing that I would like to see more, and I think this is where we trade probably a little bit our beliefs for performance, is the lack of privacy. So we are using VMs as a scaling solution, as compression method essentially, and that makes a lot of sense for scalability purpose, but I would like to see more progress in terms of real zero knowledge application of the VMs. And ultimately, performance, I think, is just like still orders of magnitude behind where we need to be to kind of shake the current mainstream, which is, I guess, Web 2 in this context. And maybe this is not popular opinion, but I'm personally very excited about zkML and hope that, the new level of performance can get us into that vertical as well.
And so what was summarizing again, for not, other than cost and latency, what it was towards this? This is a very exciting.
I think privacy is something that I would like to see, yeah. And the use case that I'm excited about is ML.
Thank you. Excellent.
Yeah, I think at this point everything has been said, but yeah, I do agree. Obviously, I do agree with everyone.
Claim your stance.
But I think, the one thing that I wanted to say before Radi already said it, but CPU performance basically, because that's the orders of magnitude away from enabling people to do client-side proofs, and client-side not by having a cluster at home, but by actually making proofs in your desktop or your browser. And I think that's necessary for privacy, for zkML, likely for identity, for a lot of things that still rely on custom circuits and very specialized techniques. So these are requirements to enable zkVMs to go into that market as well and allow for even more use cases by providing better tooling, but with the performance that's required.
All right. Follow-up question to all of you. Performance ceilings continue to persist to exist. That's not a correct English sentence, but we get it. Despite us improving heavily in our proving systems and our circuit designs, what are these ceilings that remain?
Can we start the other? No, I'm kidding. Let me just try historically to answer this. I'll try to be short. So we started acceleration from Polygon Hermes. I think Jordi and his team is around here. That was 2 years ago. We were struggling with one level of performance bottlenecks. Then we were accelerating SP1. We hit the other type of bottlenecks, and now we have our own proof system and VM. And I think every time when we look across the stack, performance bottlenecks are all the way from the VM ISA until the hardware acceleration. I think that the only way for us as an industry to basically achieve the level of performance that is going to pick up the adoption is probably to have another 100 to 1000x speed improvement across all these layers. So VM layer, proof layer, maybe also arithmetization and compiler layer, and then hardware acceleration being that GPU or custom silicon. Now, I do not think that this is very pessimistic view, because just a few years ago, it was taking minutes and hours to make proofs. Now we are below 12 seconds, and ultimately, if the trend continues, we probably won't be able to match state-of-the-art CPUs that run in silicon, but we are going to get really good results in next 24 months, I guess. So yeah, we need, I think, improvements across the stack. Do I need summary, or this time is good? Okay.
You're good.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the zkVMs, because now how many, who's counting? There's 25 plus zkVMs. A lot of them are very similar. And I think we are starting to see already different parts of different zkVMs being combined for what they do best. And I think this is what will be required at some point to get the best performance out of everything. Is just take the best front end, best optimizer, best ISA, best proof system. Of course, not as simple. There's not going to be one winner in each category, because you can also combine things differently and get different performance in different use cases. But I think this will start happening more of sharing different parts of different systems to basically get better performance. And I think this also agrees with what Radi said. Getting more performance improvements not by just the proof system, just the zkVM arithmetization, but across the stack, every single part has to be optimized. Yeah.
Anything to add?
I think it's interesting to frame things as a performance ceiling. Like I actually, like Radi is saying, there are many layers to the stack, and we actually feel like there's a ton of opportunity that's pretty obvious, but requires significant engineering work at each level. And there's sort of multiplicative impact when you optimize these separately. And so our feeling is that the short-term trend of progress will almost deterministically be quite optimistic, and also the rate at which we're coming up with new ideas to improve on each layer is also pretty steady. So it does feel that what's necessary to break through the current performance walls is actually just more time for teams to be able to really think at each layer, combine the innovations at each layer in a more optimal way, and do a bit of like co-evolution of the layers.
Bullish?
Yeah, I think I have like a quite similar answer, but the pipeline from the ZK theory to ZK in practice is like one of the slower parts of the ecosystem, which is kind of funny. So it took us about 2 years to build ZKsync Airbender from scratch. And already, like in the last year or so, like multilinear proofs have become very popular. Airbender still uses Fry Starks, which was all the rage, 2 years ago. And so, like, there's tons of room for improvement, we think, from recent papers, but we're not quite sure. Like, it's hard to tell just from a paper if it's really going to be good in practice. And we like to take in like all the new innovations, but the questions about being secure and stuff. And so I think like trying to get from the theory to in practice as fast as possible is like kind of a bottleneck, but it keeps getting better.
Let's start with you. I have a next question that segues us towards our next section of the panel around zkVM interoperability. The question is, should zkVM's performance be evaluated based on the type of workload that they do, for example, settlement or co-processing or fraud proofs, etc.? Should we Ethproofs working on kind of unifying the way we measure them. I'm contradicting this by asking, should we focus and have subsections for what type of workload zkVMs are doing?
I think it's going to mirror the world of like hardware chips pretty similarly, where like 99% of people are just going to use the same chips, but there are those like weirdos who want specialized use cases for like zkML or other situations where you have like kind of extreme and different performance requests. But I think most people are going to slap everything through like a RISC-V zkVM, apparently.
Was this a yes or a no? I can't tell.
Maybe.
It was a maybe? Yeah, all right. One maybe from Porter. Let's go, Yi.
Yeah, in my mind, there are actually two dimensions of evaluation of any zkVM. I think there's, roughly speaking, how it performs on precompiled circuits, which is basically hashing and signatures. And then separately, there's sort of, and this I consider to be the more fundamental VME part, how it performs on memory and maybe stack or registers. And those I do think, although they're maybe not benchmarked in isolation, they do represent pretty different axes of performance. And you do see this in the more common benchmarks outside of Ethproofs, where some benchmarks focus on repetition of a precompile heavy operation, while others focus on more generic VM operations. I think as we see different VM designs emerge that are not just straight RISC-V emulation, we're going to see more differentiation in performance between these. I think to date, most VMs perform kind of at a constant factor over the underlying proof system, and so these are highly correlated. But I do think in the next 6 months, we're going to see some significant differences here.
So yes, from Yi.
Yes.
Yeah, I think yes too. And I agree with what you said. I think it'd be cool to see like Ethproofs without precompiles, just from a research perspective, to see how much of a certain zkVM is because of the precompiles, because of the whole architecture, because of however it's implemented in the first place. I'm not suggesting that this is how it should be measured from the point of view of what's the fastest, because if you have precompiles, you might as well use them. It's going to make it faster and cheaper. But I think for research goals and to basically like improve the whole ecosystem, it would be quite useful to have like various benchmarks. I think not only Ethereum, because Ethereum benchmarks are in a way kind of specific to the operations it does, but like different types of benchmarks without precompilers just to measure the base of the VM, assuming a certain high level tooling, because then if you say, okay, if you no precompilers, but I'm writing circuits, then of course it's going to be faster. But then still say, okay, you have to have a Rust or Go program, something high level that people can scale and use libraries, and then compile that to some zkVM and then use that. I think it'd be quite useful, actually.
So from Leo, we have a yes, but with conditions.
Yeah.
All right.
For me, it's a non-conditional yes. I think it's just yes. The one thing that Leo mentioned about precompiles and running benchmarks without them, I think there is a lot of value in that fundamental sort of naive approach to ISA and just seeing the efficiency, because if our space evolves such that we really run a lot of random programs, that's where the best VM is probably going to shine in the long term. Having said that, I think that precompiles as a vehicle to achieving the short-term performance goals should probably dominate the space in next few years.
Perfect segue. Very intentionally built this way. Perfect segue to our next question, which is one of the most beautiful things about Ethproofs is that it's showing us, or hinting at least, a future where zkVMs can coexist and co-create and collaborate towards a similar vision, or making at least the utility of something more viable. The question is, do you guys see us progressing towards where zkVMs are more specialized and each of them specialize in a vertical to handle a specific workload, or rather a more unified convergence of more universal solutions? Let's start that side.
So the question is, if I get it right, basically, are we going to see specialization, essentially?
Specialization, or rather going the other way of having more universal solutions?
If I can predict the future, I'll probably just stick to stock trading. So like I can't, but my 2 cents, and this is based on opinions from 80s or 90s, where CPUs and the traditional semiconductor industry is that there will be specialization. And we saw that several cycles, and the AI is the latest cycle of that type of specialization. I actually wish there is a world where there is so much modularity in precompiles, and maybe what he is building with modular VM, that you can kind of do a little bit of a Lego with precompiles and choose your best topology for the workload or the proving task and keep everything as a framework, which would simplify things. But again, teams are very focused on reaching performance goals, and competitions like Ethproofs kind of foster that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we still see a lot of hard coding, a lot of kind of cutting corners and optimizations just to achieve the pure numbers. And again, I don't think there is anything bad with that. I think that's a really good pragmatic approach to see more performance in the short term. So yes, I think that we'll just see more and more specialization.
I think we'll see both in a way. I think specialization makes sense, but I also think that it makes sense that the zkVMs are going to start converging into fewer, better ones. And on the specialization part, but I think for both, actually what's needed is tooling and time. Like a lot of it is kind of just work that will take engineering time to like make things more modular, put things together, be able to have a system that you can actually plug these kind of things from different systems and they actually work. Like none of that will come for free. But I think they will have an impact on all the things we've been talking about, but mainly probably performance. But I think specialization also will happen. But again, you'll need tooling, because let's say you have a more specialized, a smaller RISC-V base or whatever zkVM that has fewer opcodes, that can only do a handful of operations, but that's enough for a lot of applications, that you can compile from a subset of C++ or Rust or whatever. Then you'll need tooling to take care of that for the user. So I think this will likely happen as well. I'm sure it already happens.
I think it does.
Yeah, so with our modular approach to OpenVM, we are kind of betting on kind of there being some diversity, but with the need to have some interoperability between different components for the diversity to be leveraged. So I think in the industry, we are seeing a bit of convergence today, and I think that's mostly social. Everyone wants to get to market. I think every RISC-V front end today is fundamentally a fork of RISC Zero's original RISC-V front end. And if you ask me, that's actually the main reason people choose RISC-V. There are benefits and drawbacks to the ISA, but I think the main benefit is you can fork the toolchain.
Amen.
And so I do think now that things are getting a little bit more mature and it's becoming more possible to deviate without getting the massive detriment of having to rebuild everything, we are going to see different teams explore deviations at one level of the stack while keeping every other level constant. And I think that will both benefit the ultimate performance, but also not every end user will want every deviation at every level of the stack. And so that's where I think that the diversity will come in.
All I heard was RISC-V rocks. Thank you so much.
All right, I'll conjecture actually that it's just going to get more homogeneous, at least for now, because really the main use case for almost everyone up here is either proving Ethereum blocks or proving L2 blocks. And if the goal's like the same at the end of the day, we can switch out some of the pieces of some of the different layers, but mostly we're all targeting the same thing. And until we find more like ZK use cases out there that aren't blockchain somewhere, we're going to find one. But until that happens, we're all building the same thing mostly.
I would have to echo that, not for us, any of us here, but for everyone else who isn't here, we're kind of are building the same thing. At least from the outside, it very much looks like it. That's partly our messaging thing that we have to work on, and some of the marketing there as well, which is one of the challenges ahead of us, honestly. Even though we're building infrastructure and it doesn't need to be terribly mainstream, but still, there is an issue there. We're rolling into our last segment, which is future looking. I want to bring some Hoop Core onto this stage, and all of you have been around for at least one, most of you for more cycles, and have been ZK Pilled, as we heard in the introductions, for most of you at least 2-3 years. Beautiful. We have been propagating this narrative of ZK is just around the corner. It's almost, we're just becoming mainstream. What is your personal conviction that this time it's actually different? And even everything, all the walls that we talked about in the middle of the panel seem small compared to why you believe this is happening now. And in the next few years, we're actually there. The technology is actually there. What keeps you convicted that it's true? We are getting adoption.
So in 2023, I predicted that 2024 would be the year of ZK apps. So yeah, if I could predict the future, I'd be in the stock market. I'll flip-flop from my last answer though and say I do believe that we will ZK prove pretty much every computation in the entire world. It will be like public key cryptography or digital signatures. It's just going to be everywhere. And that's still maybe not quite this cycle, maybe in the next one, hopium, but it's coming.
Hold on. What makes you believe it though? Like when you wake up, you lock in for work. What makes you believe it that we're doing it?
It's Vitalik sent one tweet like a couple years ago that said ZK snarks are going to be significant revolution, and Vitalik's never been wrong before. So
it's hard to top that answer. I would say, there's the bearish perspective would be like, hey, we've come so far on performance, but adoption is lagging performance. But I think the more optimistic way to look at that is to not compare ZK to other things in blockchains, but to compare ZK to something like elliptic curve cryptography. So the amount of time it really took elliptic curve cryptography to go mainstream was significantly longer. And also, if you compare the maturity of ZK solutions along like the developer experience, along security, and even the abstractions around ZK solutions, we're frankly nowhere close. So I think there is still a lot we can do to make but the DevX, the performance, the security better. And I think what's interesting to me is that there are people outside of blockchains who are interested in ZK today, and they have actual questions. And those questions are technical things that we have already solved. For example, on the performance side, I wouldn't say we as a space are fully there, but we're getting closer, or have a pathway to solving, I think, on the DevX and the security side. So I think if we really were in a situation where most of the technical problems are solved and there's no adoption, that would be deeply negative. But I would say there's definitely some interest, but there's still a lot to do. And so that feels like an optimistic scenario to me.
So let me summarize. When you lock in for work every morning, what keeps you going on this to work specifically on this? Because you do something really, really specific to this space. Is what keeps you motivated and believed is the progress we're making, but at the same time, the mountain of work that's ahead of us. Did I understand this correctly?
Yeah, I think it's now sort of clear what is the ideal ZK solution. Like maybe to paint a cartoon, it would be you can run on one core and prove in real time on the rest of your computer. I think we're not really close to that, but I think we have pathways to try to get there.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah, I think we're definitely not there yet. And I do agree with Yi that it looks like this is what we know where we should go and what's going to enable the use cases that are not there yet. And I think for the longest time, this has been the meme, right? That ZK has a bunch of people spending millions of dollars in development and 25 plus zkVMs, but no users. But I also do agree that people are getting interested and they are doing things that are similar. And I think it's also hard to zoom out and notice how fast things are developing. I mean, yeah, I think we do notice, but compared to like other types of cryptography or other things that took longer to get established, it's kind of easy to like not notice how fast ZK is, like how much faster ZK is being developed and potentially adopted. So I think this is kind of like one usual, like the other is grass is greener type of thing, that we think we're not fast enough and there's no use cases, but I think ultimately people are starting to notice and starting to ask questions like both Port and you said, and yeah, I think we eventually will get there. Yeah.
Follow-up is, so then on a daily basis, what gives you conviction to still work on this specific thing?
Number go up.
Fair enough. I mean,
By number of proofs you can make per second.
Sure. Thank you.
Throughput. Yeah, I think like for this community, everybody's deeply zooming. It may feel that like innovation is not going at the right speed, especially in terms of like productization and where we want Ethereum proving to be. But I actually probably gave a hint a little bit of that before. I think innovation is going at dramatic speed, and that's what makes me the most bullish about this ecosystem. Like the quality of recent works were really good across different ISAs at the VM level. We have new prover system recently announced by ZKsync, which also brings more kind of competitiveness to the market. We are seeing really a lot of good hardware acceleration going on. So across the stack, really, we are innovating quite a lot. Sorry. Another thing that I want to say, what drives me personally, and this may not necessarily hit the Ethproofs use case, but I think we are not far away from a world where some software will be executed with a proof of execution. And that opens a bunch of use cases that these VMs are built for. So there is a notion of product definition that he was talking about. And yeah, I think that really excites me a lot.
Excellent answers, wide range of answers. We're reaching our last question. And the last question, we're looking into the future, mostly of Ethproofs and our collaboration. All right. So Ethproofs has shown us a way of measuring current benchmarks. But for us to be successful, we need to look into the future, plan ahead, and foster successful collaboration. So our last question for today is, what would be something that we should have as a shared goal that we progress towards for the next 12 months? And what would ideal collaboration look like for that?
I can only think of what I would like to see on Ethproofs that is not there today. I think a lot of this race to real-time proving focused a lot on hardware acceleration, and maybe we should also look at the sheer CPU numbers. That's actually, to quote Leo to an extent, maybe even like just single-threaded CPU execution or single-core execution of certain of these proofs. I mean, I know those times will suck, but I think there is level of technical detail that will inform research and help us all make better decisions at a low level. So that's like the only thing that comes to my mind. Maybe you can reiterate the part of the question that I missed.
Is a specific goal that all of us that are contributing to Ethproofs right now would have as a target? Because currently we do current benchmarks for mostly cost and latency. We're working towards having at least this singular thing we focus on of benchmarking each other with each other for proving Ethereum blocks. What would be next 12 months goal that we can all pitch into to progress towards?
Yeah, I think we spoke a lot about different collaborations. I think people brought up ISA design, compiler, different things related to the proof systems. I don't know, maybe just like if everybody was pushing their things open source, and again, that would kind of initiate more sharing, that would definitely help the ecosystem. That's like the low-hanging fruit that comes to my mind.
One shared goal. I think maybe that doesn't depend that much on us here, but like us, the five of us. But having the vision for what a snarkified Ethereum L1 would look like, and what do we need to get there, and yeah, I'm sure people are working on this. But yeah, and I think also associated with CPU proofs, yeah, having some, again, I mean, we talked about this before, but having benchmarks or having the goal of focusing on CPU proof performance would be great for research and development as well.
So this is a very Vitalik targeted answer, I believe.
Why?
Because it was mostly a roadmap, no? Of what a snark.
I mean, people are working on it, right? There are new teams working on it. Alex is here, maybe. He's working directly on it. Yeah, I guess you'll have to answer that soon.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess when I think about where Ethproofs really shines, it's that it is a neutral benchmark. I think one frustration we've had in benchmarking is that if you really want to benchmark fairly against a different VM, you can spend so much time doing it that in that time, that team probably made their VM better. You could have made your VM better. And so as a result, we generally don't do any competitive benchmarking. We think it's a waste of time. So I think it's an opportunity where Ethproofs could provide some auditability or rerunability of the benchmarks to really have, as in a public way, sort of one-click reproducible benchmarks across the space. I think that would benefit everyone. So when you see a blog post, if they have some crazy number, you can at least have some basis to start understanding where it's coming from.
That would be radical. And funny you say that, because the RISC Zero, the VM is not on the Ethproofs website yet, partially for this reason.
All right, my wholesome hope for the community is that we can all rally together and market ZK more and have ZK be more of a cool, trendy tech thing, as big as AI. My less wholesome goal is that the next Ethproofs conference, we just lock all 25 engineering teams in the same room and only let one team out. And
who do you think would win?
Yeah, which criteria? What is the one thing that we
if
let
we
them
have
out based
good
on?
Ethereum values, we'll all bond together and we'll all be one giant team.
Unification, baby. Yes. All right, these were great answers. I still don't know what the roadmap would look like for all of this, but thank you, all four of you, for answering this magnificent question. We have reached the end of the panel. I hope because of our summaries and the wonderful answers, you do have some more tangible takeaways of everyone's thoughts and progress and how Ethproofs is going as of now and the hindrances that we still face and where we're going next. Excellent work, everyone, sitting through this. And we're perfectly on time. Stay for the next panels. Thank you so much.